Why must Harvard be destroyed? Harvard must be destroyed because it is the mothership of corporate America. It is the heart of the Death Star. Harvard is where the top officers of corporate America are schooled and trained. And it is corporate America that is destroying the United States of America. Now let's look at this recent war with Iran, which is on again, off again, on again, off again, on again, off again. It never stops. And what the war fundamentally represents is a net transfer of wealth from the American people to corporate America. It's corporate America that profits from the bombs and material that are used to subdue Iran. And in return, the country of Iran is bombing the hell out of America's Gulf state allies. Corporate America is going to take tremendous money, trillions of dollars from us to repair this damage. And make no mistake about it, the United States will spend the money to repair this damage. And the repair will be justified in the name of national security. And who will benefit from this? Corporate America will benefit from this. Trillions of dollars will have to be printed to fix this mess. And this is why Harvard must be stopped. This war and the wars to come will never go away as long as the supreme war junkie, Harvard University, exists to feed its habit. And as long as parents keep sending their children to Harvard, their children will be indoctrinated into the Harvard way, and Harvard will continue to inflict its misery upon the rest of us. There's no non-alignment here. People have to make a choice. It's us or them. What is lacking in the United States today is a proper balance between corporate-minded, Harvard-trained executives and regular plebes who come from outside the Ivy League and whose interests are more grounded and aligned with the people. This imbalance has been growing since the end of World War I, but it has accelerated after World War II. James Conant was a former president of Harvard back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. And it was his misguided vision to internationalize Harvard so as to put it on a higher pedestal, which he felt would better train the officers of corporate America, who he and others like John McCloy felt should take over the leadership reins of the world. What arrogance was this? Thus began the concept of the best and the brightest and the desire and drive of young students to seek out Harvard, to be associated with the so-called best and brightest. This misguided quest for greatness became a snowball that grew into a runaway boulder. And soon the boulder became a gargantuan monster imbued with a self-fulfilling prophecy of immortality, rooted in avarice, as national and multinational corporations, led by Harvard fools, grew larger and more dominant within the US and the world. In time, corporations, large corporations, and financial firms whose leaders were trained by Harvard began to suck up regional businesses in the United States. It was these regional family-owned businesses which were more grounded and attuned to the needs of regular people than the needs of the national agenda. But soon, the demands of the national agenda became paramount. Thus grew an even greater imbalance between the needs and focus of the United States as a nation, as opposed to the welfare of the individual states and the people who lived in those states. Now, you could see this in the composition of the Supreme Court and in the Senate, House, and presidency, as more and more of our leaders gradually came from within the Ivy League and Harvard University. Big government likes to work with big people and big corporations. And big corporations and big government are fueled by Harvard University. Big government does not like to work with small people and small businessmen whose mindset is more parochial and grounded. As a result, the United States government became more distant and accessible, and consequently more unable to meet the needs of the people. Instead, the primary concerns of Washington, D.C. centered on fighting wars abroad rather than taking care of the infrastructure of the United States or the people in a substantive way. And this is what has led us to where we are today, an overly centralized, fascist, militaristic state that focuses on national affairs rather than the individual needs of its citizens. And this is not a good thing. What Harvard and its so-called wise men cannot comprehend is that there is a limitation to what the United States can do in this world. This is lost on the arrogant Harvard graduate who believes himself to be a master of the universe. This was our problem in Vietnam. This was our problem in Iraq. And this is our problem in Iran today. Our leaders cannot accept limitations on their immortality. They refuse to accept the fact that they cannot control all the events of the world. Consequently, our Ivy League leaders continue to bankrupt the United States in order to maintain a feudal world of exploitation that they cannot control. In March of 1968, during the Vietnam War, there was a crisis in the gold market. It occurred because other countries in the world lost faith in the United States because the United States was burning through money in its futile attempt to conquer Vietnam. As a result, other countries of the world began redeeming their increasingly worthless dollars for gold. So there was a run on gold. Of course, we're not on the gold standard anymore, but many other countries in the world purchase our bonds as the US dollar is seen as one of the safer currencies in the world. But if we escalate this war with Iran and start burning through trillions of dollars, we're going to run into a similar crisis, only in the bond market. The bond market will crash as other countries of the world see the US as not so safe a bet anymore. This means that the United States government will have to pay higher interest rates in order to borrow cash. These higher interest rates will ripple through the secondary bond market and the stock market. And the result will be devastation to the economy. Soon, the United States will have to pay the piper, and it won't be pretty. Unfortunately, the rest of the people in the United States will be dragged down as the war with Iran proves to be the quagmire catastrophe that it will prove to be. The Harvard graduate, obsessed by his own self-importance, his belief in himself as a master of the universe and a living God, will be the last to reckon with these realities. And we will be the worse off for it. Harvard must be stopped. It's not going to do any good to change the politicians or to change the party in power, because all the major politicians and all the parties in power are fueled by Harvard University and its like-minded Ivy League kind. It's a game stacked against us. And all the Harvard graduates in positions of power will think alike. They will think alike because they will not get anywhere near a position of power unless they toe the party line. You see, our leaders still think it's 1953, and that America is the dominant force in the world. After World War II, the United States was the dominant force in the world. We're not living in that world anymore. The world has vastly changed. After World War II, Russia had been decimated by losing 20 million people. They were in no position to dominate like we were, and they were experimenting with a flawed brand of Marxism. The Chinese, in 1953, they were barely a country at all. They were beginning from scratch. But the year is now 2026. The Chinese are much stronger than they were in 1953. In fact, in many respects, they are better off than we are. The Russians are no longer living under a Marxist regime. They're also stronger than they were in 1953. And these two countries, Russia and China, are going to back up Iran to the hilt. The war with Iran is an unwinnable war. It will not be won by the United States. The Chinese and the Russians are not going to accept JV status in this world. They aren't going to put up with it. Yet we have this ruling Harvard-educated elite in the United States that believes that they are living gods. And this is reinforced by the people of the United States who have been programmed to believe that Harvard graduates are living gods. So what you have here is a reverberating circuit of bullshit. The ruling elite tell the people through the media that the Harvard graduate is the best and the brightest. And then the poor and the middle class reinforce to the ruling elite through their deference that the Harvard graduate is the best and the brightest. But we know that they aren't, and we know that they haven't been for some time. It was the so-called wise men who advised Johnson to escalate the war in Vietnam. Now, ultimately, they had to change their thinking after the Tet Offensive, but by then, the damage had been done to the United States. So much money had been spent on a lost cause. What this proved was that these so-called wise men were not wise men at all, even back then. Nor were there any wise men in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and in so many other conflicts that the United States has had since. It is these wise men who are egging on the president to keep fighting this war. And they're doing it because they're addicted to war and the money and the power that ensue from it. And they can't stop. And that is bad for us. We are the abused wife and kids of a junkie father who can't stop spending the family money on his habit. What I say comes with the understanding that when I say Ivy League, I'm not just talking about the 8 original schools in the Ivy League, but in addition, those schools that have taken on Ivy League status. So I'm talking about schools like Stanford and MIT, just a small number. So here's the math, pure and simple. Let us stipulate that the Ivy League pumps out 65,000 graduates and postgraduates per year. Let us say that the non-Ivy League schools pump out about 2 million graduates and postgraduates per year. Now, the numbers are going to vary, of course, but I'm trying to pick numbers that are within reason and that will exaggerate the numbers to make my subsequent argument even stronger. Now, as you can already see, the non-Ivy League schools dwarf the Ivy League. But let's assume that the Ivy League represents the best and brightest. False assumption. Let's assume that they represent top 5% of all students with regard to true intellect, not the fake intellect that the SAT measures. The Ivies do not, but let's assume that they do because they think they do. Let's also assume that the knuckleheads who lead these Ivy League universities have the ability to call out the best and the brightest, an asinine concept to begin with, the best and the brightest. Let us state that 95% of the people who graduate from the Ivy League are truly the best and the brightest. And then let us state that only 5% of the people who come from the non-Ivy League schools are the best and the brightest. Now let's multiply these coefficients against their respective graduating classes. 65,000 Ivies times 95% is equal to 61,750. 2 million non-Ivies times 5% is equal to 100,000. What this means, if you accept these numbers, there are 100,000 people from non-Ivy League schools who fit into the top strata, which is considerably higher than the 61,750 people who graduate from the Ivy League. Now, given this, why are so many of our top corporations and government positions filled by Ivy League graduates? Why is nearly every member of the Supreme Court an Ivy League or Ivy Plus graduate? Why are all our presidents, with the exception of Joe Biden since 1988, coming from the Ivy League? Finally, isn't it time to restore some balance in the United States?